memoir and part folklore collection, this volume contributes to an important and timely conversation about cultural pride and cultural appropriation in an increasingly globalized nation and world. Ozark Folk Magic is a book that needed to come from an insider like Brandon Weston. As a member of the Ozarks community himself, Weston is not only privy to knowledge that might not have been accessible to outsiders, but he also has access to the language and vocabulary used by the communities within which he works. As a folklorist born outside the Ozarks community, I can attest to the strength, smarts, and resiliency of Ozarks cultures, but I would not feel comfortable using the term hillbilly. As an outsider, I would fear this term would imply my derision and condescension. Weston, however, is an insider to this culture and has access and entitlements that I do not have. Weston straddles an interesting divide between older methods of research and a more postmodern approach to his role as researcher. His collecting methods harken back to older forms of folklore collecting, where large swaths of folklore culture were distilled into compilation books that did not necessarily highlight the biographies of the informants. Diverging from contemporary professional folklore practice, Weston does not give overt details about the identities and situations in which he collected his content, likely with the intent to protect the identities of practitioners operating within stigmatized traditions. Professional folklorists today would be more likely to include a great deal of context for each instance of folklore collected: the who, what, where, when. Folklorists stress context to reinforce the role individuals have in shaping their community's folklore. Traditions are tweaked depending on teller, audience, time, and place. What you see written down in Ozark Folk Magic is the culmination of Weston's conversations with many folks, and his methods are important where traditions have been historically shunned and feared. However, I caution you to remember that it does not make it the final and official account of Ozark folk belief. Taking Ozark Folk Magic as the definitive and final account risks cementing and stagnating what Weston stresses is a live, growing, and changing tradition. Folklore is alive and well in the Ozarks, and Ozark Folk Magic is a snapshot of a moment in time. Again, it is important to remember that despite situating himself within the lineage of folklore collecting in the Ozarks, Weston is collecting as a member of the community himself. When Weston refers to the cold scientific approach of folklorists toward informants, he is referring to a style of research more characteristic of the early to mid-20th century, when folklorists often followed the anthropological trend of documenting the other, while also attempting to justify the objective scientific nature of their work. Folklorists today do not operate as they did decades ago. Over the last several decades, professional folklorists have become increasingly focused on their obligations to their collaborators in the field, as well as in understanding the ways in which their presence may affect what and how folklore is collected. By acknowledging his own responsibilities to his informants, Weston intuitively works much more like a contemporary professional folklorist. This is important because it means that Weston's research is reciprocal. In an era where cultural appropriation endlessly takes from and consumes the communities that are supposedly admired, Weston actively works to ensure sensitivity and respect for the cultures whose healing traditions have coalesced in the Ozarks. Finally, do not let the theme of simplicity in Ozark Folk Magic cause you to think the people of the Ozarks are not savvy. Despite the stereotypes imposed on this region, Weston demonstrates that you may not encounter a more clever and creative people. Virginia Siegel, M.A., Folk Arts Coordinator, Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts, University of Arkansas. Introduction. We always lie to strangers. Traditional Ozark saying. Doc Green was a witch, and everyone around knew it. Not a soul dared ever call him that word, though. Folks around Nelson's Holler had heard too many tales about Doc Green's temper. Old Buddy Pickett had a cousin who let his lips flap during church one Sunday about how Doc Green had two colored eyes, one that stared into this world, and the other, well, that one was reserved for seeing haints and the little people. A crow called outside the meeting house.